My blood initially ran cold, then simmered to a precise metallic hum. I saw it all unfolding in slow motion. The millions in lost revenue, the client exodus, the inevitable system collapse. The man didn't understand that Horizon wasn't just code. It was a living entity, a delicate ecosystem of data pathways and logic gates designed to withstand the very stresses his streamline was guaranteed to induce. He was a bull in a data center, touting his revolutionary approach with a grin that would make a used car salesman blush. The irony was, I'd already documented every potential failure point of a similar integration during Horizon's initial design phase. A thick binder of data, hidden behind a false back in my office file cabinet, detailing exactly why his brilliant idea was a ticking time bomb. Across the packed auditorium, I caught the eye of Sarah from IT, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. Further back, Michael from finance had his jaw clenched so tight I worried about his teeth. They knew. They just didn't have the leverage to stop the inevitable train wreck. But what Chad, and even they, didn't know was that some systems, when pushed to their breaking point, sometimes break back. And I, the quiet woman in the third row, had been meticulously planning for the inevitable failure of an empty suit, like Chad, long before he even waltzed through the doors. The applause that followed Chad's presentation was polite, corporate, and utterly clueless. It was the sound of 100 people clapping for the iceberg their ship was about to hit. I remained seated, my hands cold in my lap, the metallic hum in my veins now a low, insistent thrum. My plan, the one I had filed away under contingency, existential threat, was more of a theoretical exercise, a professional's primordium. I never thought I'd actually have to use it. Now, it felt less like a plan and more like a prophecy. As the crowd began to disperse, a miasma of cheap cologne and forced enthusiasm announced Chad's approach. "Alina, just the woman I wanted to see. What did you think? Paradigm shifting, right?" He didn't wait for an answer. He never did. Conversations with Chad weren't dialogues, they were broadcasts. "Look, Chad," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "We need to talk about the core dependency matrix. The API you're proposing from QuickLink Solutions isn't just incompatible. It operates on a fundamentally different data validation protocol. It will create recursive error loops in Horizon's archival subroutines." He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture he must have practiced in front of a mirror. Ellie, getting stuck in the technical weeds again. "That's why we have you, just, engineer a solution, make the puzzle pieces fit. We're talking about a Q4 rollout." Aggressive, I know, but that's how we disrupt. The infantilizing nickname, the buzzword salad, the complete and utter disregard for the complex reality I had just laid out. It was a masterclass in hollow suit artistry. "It's not a puzzle, Chad. It's a load-bearing wall. What you're asking me to do is replace it with a sheet of drywall and hope the building doesn't collapse." "It will." His smile tightened, the plastic veneer cracking just enough to show the impatience beneath. "Look, the board is fully behind this. It's about moving forward, embracing change. We can't let legacy thinking hold us back. I need you to be a team player, Alina. Get on board or get out of the way." And there it was, the threat, wrapped in the glossy paper of corporate jargon. The train was leaving the station, and he was happy to run me over with it. I spent the rest of the day in a fugue state, drafting a 5-page memo detailing, with excruciating precision, every single point of failure his plan would create. I cited specific lines of code, referenced historical server load data, and projected financial losses down to the penny. I sent it to Chad, his direct supervisor, and the head of HR. It was the professional equivalent of firing a flare into the night sky. The response came not as an email, but as a meeting invitation the next morning. Title: Organizational Realignment. Attendees: me, Chad, and Brenda from HR. Brenda's office smelled of artificial vanilla and quiet corporate executions. She gave me a sympathetic, yet powerless, smile. Chad sat opposite me, arms crossed, radiating smug finality. "Alina," Brenda began, reading from a script. "We've received your memo, and while we appreciate your passion for the legacy systems, the company is moving in a new strategic direction. My memo wasn't about passion, I countered, my voice dangerously calm. It was a risk assessment. A warning, Chad scoffed. It was a textbook example of resistance to change, a leaner. Your inability to adapt to a more agile framework is concerning. It suggests you're not aligned with Nexus's forward-thinking vision. The words hit me like stones: legacy systems, resistance to change, not aligned. They were turning my expertise, my meticulous care, my 7 years of dedication, into a character flaw. I had built the very ground they stood on, and they were calling me an obstacle for pointing out the sinkhole. We think it's best for all parties, Brenda continued, her eyes refusing to meet mine, if we transition you out of your current role. We're offering a generous severance package, conditional on the signing of a standard non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement. I was being fired. Fired for doing my job, for protecting the company from the CEO's idiot nephew. The metallic hum in my blood went silent, replaced by a vast, freezing emptiness. I looked at Chad, who was examining his cuticles, already bored with the proceedings. He hadn't just won, he had erased me. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. The system was breaking, and I was the first component to be jettisoned. I signed the papers, my signature a spidery, unfamiliar scrawl. I was escorted back to my desk to collect my personal belongings, a single cardboard box for nearly a decade of my life. My keyboard, a worn-in ergonomic model that molded to my hands. A framed photo of my late golden retriever, Buster. And the thick, unassuming binder from its hiding place behind the filing cabinet. The security guard watched me with practiced indifference as I slid it into my box. He had no idea I was walking out with the company's death warrant. The first week was a blur of silence. My apartment, once a refuge from the constant digital chatter of work, became an echo chamber. I'd wake up with a jolt at 6:30 a.m., my body still wired for the morning sprint, only to be met with the crushing stillness. No Slack notifications pinging. No urgent emails flagged in red. No complex problem to untangle in my mind while the coffee brewed. My professional identity, the core of who I was, had been severed, and I was bleeding out into the quiet of my living room. I tried to be productive. I updated my LinkedIn profile, the words Senior Operations Lead at Nexus Innovations, 20,162,023, staring back at me like an epitaph. I scrolled through job boards, but every listing felt alien. They wanted growth hackers and synergy gurus. I was an architect. I built things to last, not to be hacked. The corporate world had started speaking a language I no longer understood, a dialect of pure, unadulterated bullshit. The self-doubt began as a whisper and grew into a roar. Maybe Chad was right. Maybe I was legacy thinking. Maybe my meticulous, cautious approach was obsolete in a world that prized disruption above stability. I reread the memo I had sent, searching for a flaw in my logic, a hint of the hysteria they had accused me of. But there was none. It was just cold, hard data. The truth. A truth nobody wanted to hear. The severance money sat in my bank account, feeling less like a safety net and more like blood money. Hush money. I was paid to disappear, to take my inconvenient knowledge and fade into obscurity while they drove my creation off a cliff. I felt a deep, gnawing guilt for Sarah and Michael, for the dozens of other good people I'd left behind who were now trapped on that doomed ship. I had abandoned them. I had taken the easy way out. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were a feverish loop of cascading error messages, server alarms blaring in an empty room, and Chad's beaming face on a giant screen, saying, "We're leveraging proactive disruption," as the digital world crumbled around him. I'd wake up with my heart pounding, the ghost of a system I could no longer protect crying out for me. This was the fracture. The deep, psychic break of having your life's work stolen and dismantled by a fool and being told you were the problem. The pain wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing a part of myself. Horizon wasn't just a platform, it was a manifestation of my mind, my logic, my care. And they were lobotomizing it with a cheap, off-the-shelf power tool. I spent a month adrift in this gray purgatory. I stopped looking at job boards. I muted notifications from former colleagues on social media. I was a ghost, haunting the ruins of my own career. The fire in me, the quiet confidence that had built one of the most stable integration platforms in the industry, had been reduced to a pile of cold ash. Then, one Tuesday night, as I was listlessly deleting old files from my personal cloud storage, a notification blinked in the corner of my screen. It wasn't from Gmail or LinkedIn. It was from an old, encrypted peer-to-peer messaging app I had set up years ago for the original Horizon development team. A channel named Dusix Machina. We used it for secure, off-the-record brainstorming. It had been dormant for 5 years. The message was from a user I recognized only by their handle, Colonel Panic. Sarah, Ellie, you there? My fingers trembled as I typed back. Here, what's wrong? The reply came instantly. Everything, it's a shit show. He's not integrating. He's just plastering over the core, hard-coding exceptions for the QuickLink API instead of building a proper bridge. The data logs are a mess. We're getting phantom sync errors that disappear on refresh. It's like the system is developing a nervous twitch. I closed my eyes, picturing it. He wasn't performing surgery, he was applying bandages to a tumor. Each hard-coded exception was another line of corrupted DNA introduced into Horizon's pristine code. The worst part, she continued, is the first major client migration is in 2 months. Viridian Dynamics. Their entire supply chain management runs through us. If that migration fails, she didn't need to finish. Viridian was our biggest client. Their contract had ironclad uptime clauses and ruinous financial penalties for data loss. It was the very contract Horizon had been designed to service flawlessly. He's flying blind, Ellie. He fired the only person who had the map. That was it. That was the glimmer. Reading Sarah's words, a single, hot ember began to glow in the cold ash of my despair. It wasn't the thirst for revenge. It was something deeper, more primal. It was the architect's fury at seeing a beautiful, functional structure being systematically demolished by incompetence. It was the doctor's anger at watching a charlatan commit malpractice. My pain began to transmute. The helplessness, the self-doubt, they started to burn away, forged by the heat of pure, professional rage into something new, something sharp and cold and clear. My voice, my internal monologue, began to shift. The fragmented anxiety was replaced by a familiar cadence. Analyze, assess, strategize. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a systems analyst, and Nexus Innovations had just become the most fascinatingly broken system I had ever encountered. Chad wasn't just an antagonist, he was a predictable variable. His arrogance, his ignorance, his reliance on buzzwords, they weren't just character flaws. They were exploitable vulnerabilities. I walked over to my bookshelf, pulled down the plain, black binder, and set it on my desk. Contingency, existential threat. I blew a thin layer of dust off the cover and opened it to the first page. It was time to get to work. The blueprint for my comeback began not with a bang, but with a whisper. My first move was to reestablish quiet channels. I told Sarah to maintain radio silence on the encrypted channel unless it was a coded emergency. Instead, we communicated through the metadata of a shared Spotify playlist. Adding a specific 80s power ballad meant a critical new bug had been discovered. A 90s grunge track meant Chad had made another clueless public statement. It was untraceable, mundane, and perfectly suited to our purpose. Next, I reached out to Michael from finance. I didn't use a burner phone or a cloak and dagger email. I used the most overlooked and trusted tool in the corporate arsenal, a formal inquiry via my personal lawyer. The letter was a masterpiece of polite, weaponized legalese. It stated that, as the former lead on the Horizon platform, I had residual concerns regarding the company's compliance with specific data integrity clauses outlined in the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, particularly as they pertain to the upcoming Viridian Dynamics migration. I requested, for my own legal protection, documentation proving that adequate stress testing and data validation protocols were in place for the new Synergy Streamline integration. I wasn't accusing them of anything. I was just a concerned former employee covering her own ass, but I knew Michael. He was a man who lived and breathed compliance. The mere mention of SOX would trigger his professional anxiety, like a Pavlovian bell. The letter wouldn't go to Chad. It would go straight to the legal department, who would forward it to finance, forcing Michael to start asking questions he was probably already afraid to ask. I wasn't planting a bomb, I was forcing them to inspect their own, pre-existing one. While I waited for that seed to germinate, I focused on Chad. I began to study him like a bug under a microscope. I created a private dossier, a Google Doc I named the Barrington Follies. I set up alerts for his name. I followed Nexus's press releases. He was a geyser of meaningless corporate jargon, and every interview, every LinkedIn post was a gift. "We're actioning a paradigm shift to unlock next-gen value streams," he told a minor tech blog. I noted the date and the specific, empty phrase. "Our North Star is a frictionless, synergy-driven client experience," he posted on LinkedIn, alongside a stock photo of diverse, smiling people in a boardroom. I screenshot it. He was building his own funeral pyre, and I was diligently gathering the kindling. He was so obsessed with the appearance of innovation that he was neglecting the actual, grimy work of it. Sarah's updates confirmed it. His team was spending 80% of their time building a flashy new dashboard for the Synergy Streamline interface and only 20% on the core integration logic. It was all Chrome, no engine. The turning point came 3 weeks later. Michael contacted my lawyer. He couldn't provide the documentation I'd requested because it didn't exist. Chad had bypassed all standard testing protocols, labeling them as bureaucratic bottlenecks. Michael was panicking. In his email, he mentioned that the Veridian contract had a specific, multi-million-dollar penalty clause for any data discrepancy, exceeding 0.01% during the migration phase. It was a clause I had insisted on 5 years ago to justify the budget for Horizon's triple redundancy checksum system. A system Chad's team, according to Sarah, had disabled because it slowed down the dev environment. I had him. No, he had himself. I had simply laid the track years ago, and he was chugging along right on schedule. My quiet anger had now cooled into a state of crystalline focus. The desolation was a distant memory. The woman who sat in my apartment now was not the ghost of a leaner Vance. She was the resurrected architect, and she was about to demonstrate what happens when you ignore a blueprint. The plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, the Trojan horse. Phase 2, controlled chaos. Phase 3, the public disassembly. Phase 1 was the binder, my meticulously researched, prescient documentation of failure. It was useless sitting on my desk. It needed to be inside the walls of Nexus. But I couldn't just email it to the board. That would be too direct, too easily dismissed as the sour grapes of a disgruntled exemplary. It had to be discovered, an artifact unearthed from the ruins of my tenure. I knew that every quarter, Nexus hired a team of external auditors to review internal security protocols. This included ensuring that sensitive documents were properly stored or disposed of. I still had my old office keycard. The deactivation signal was usually delayed by 30-60 days by a notoriously slow HR department. It was a long shot, but it was a data point worth testing. One evening, dressed in nondescript clothes, I drove to the Nexus office park. I walked with the feigned confidence of a late-night coder, head down, focused. I swiped the card. The light flashed green, my breath caught in my throat. I was in. The office was a graveyard. Empty desks glowed under the cold fluorescent lights. I walked to my old workspace. Someone else was there now, their desk adorned with a Funko Pop and a motivational poster that read, "Crush it." I felt a brief pang, not of nostalgia, but of pity. I went to the old file cabinet. The false back was undisturbed. I slipped the binder inside, but not before adding a new, final page. It was a printout of Chad's LinkedIn post about a frictionless, synergy-driven client experience, with a handwritten note in the margin. Synergy is not a substitute for sound engineering. CB. We'll learn this the hard way. I signed it EV and dated it the week I was fired. Let them think it had been there all along. As I left, I did one last thing. I went to the small server room on our floor, a room I had designed. I knew that the environmental control system had a manual override log. I simply opened the cabinet, took a time-stamped photo with my phone of the log showing all systems were nominal, and left. It was a loose thread, a piece of information that seemed irrelevant now, but my instincts told me to collect the data. An architect always checks the foundations. Phase 1 was complete. The Trojan horse was within the city gates, waiting for the auditors to find it. Now, all I had to do was wait for gravity to do its work. The weeks leading up to the Viridian Dynamics migration were a masterclass in calculated inaction. I became a passive observer, a scientist watching a predictable chemical reaction. My Spotify playlist with Sarah became a morbidly fascinating chronicle of Chad's cascading failures. And Rem's song, "It's the End of the World as We Know It," signaled that the first small-scale data import had resulted in a 4% corruption rate, which Chad dismissed as a statistical anomaly. A Queen track, "Another One Bites the Dust," meant a senior engineer on Chad's team had quit, unable to stomach the willful ignorance any longer. My primary role was to be a ghost, a phantom of competence whose absence was becoming more palpable by the day. Michael, now thoroughly spooked, was peppering Chad's team with requests for risk mitigation reports. Sarah, with my quiet guidance, was meticulously documenting every protocol override and every ignored error flag in secure, off-site logs. They weren't sabotaging anything. They were simply doing their jobs with a newfound, scrupulous diligence. They were creating an unassailable paper trail of incompetence, with every arrow pointing directly at Chadwick Barrington III. The system I had built was beginning to fight back in its own way. Horizon was designed for stability and self-preservation. It had redundant logging systems, automated integrity checks, and fallback protocols. Chad's team, in their rush to plaster their synergy streamline on top of it, had treated these features like annoying pop-up ads, disabling them one by one. They didn't realize they were cutting the brake lines and switching off the airbags. The beauty of my plan was that I didn't need to hack or sabotage. Horizon itself, in its degraded state, would be the instrument of Chad's demise. I had built it to be resilient. When a system this complex is subjected to illogical and contradictory inputs, like the junk data from the Quicklink API, it doesn't just crash. It tries to protect itself. It isolates corrupted data packets, flags inconsistencies, and, in a last-ditch effort, severs connections to the offending input source to preserve the integrity of the core. Chad thought he was integrating a new tool. In reality, he was introducing a virus, and Horizon's immune system was about to go into anaphylactic shock. The day of the Viridian migration arrived. It was a Thursday. The launch was scheduled for 2:00 p.m. to be celebrated in a company-wide virtual town hall meeting, led by Chad himself. A former colleague, still sympathetic to my cause, sent me a guest link to the webinar. I made a pot of tea, sat at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. On one half of the screen was the town hall, a Brady Bunch grid of hopeful and anxious faces. On the other half, I had a simple terminal window open, running a script that pinged Nexus's public-facing servers once every second. It was a simple pulse, a way to monitor the system's heartbeat. The town hall began. The CEO, Chad's uncle, gave a glowing introduction, praising Chad's visionary leadership and disruptive spirit. Then, Chad's face filled the screen. He was beaming, his suit immaculate, his confidence stratospheric. "Thank you, Robert," he said, oozing charisma. "Today marks a new dawn for Nexus, the culmination of months of hard work. The launch of Project Synergy Streamline is not just a product rollout, it's a statement. It's a testament to our commitment to agile, forward-thinking solutions." Behind him, on a screen, was the new, flashy dashboard his team had built. It was all sleek graphs and pulsing metrics. It looked impressive. It was also, as I knew from Sarah, completely disconnected from the actual backend data. It was a Potemkin village of a user interface. "And now," Chad announced dramatically, "in just a moment, our partners at Viridian Dynamics will flip the switch, migrating their entire supply chain data onto the new, streamlined platform. Let's bring our head of IT, Sarah Jenkins, on screen to confirm that all systems are go." Sarah's face appeared in a small box. She looked tired but composed. "All pre-migration checks are complete," she said, her words carefully chosen. She wasn't lying. The checks were complete. They just showed a dozen red flags that Chad had ordered them to ignore. Excellent, Chad boomed. Let the synergy begin. He clicked a button on his screen. A cheesy animation of flowing data streams played. The employees on the call dutifully unmuted their mics to applaud. I watched my terminal window. Ping 24 ms. Ping 24 ms. Ping 25 ms. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. Chad's smile remained plastered on his face. Then, a message appeared in the webinar's chat from a Veridian employee. Is anyone else seeing a permissions error on the login portal? Chad didn't see it. He was too busy basking. Another message. We're getting a data mismatch flag on our end. Can you confirm the integrity of the initial data packet? My terminal window. Ping 89 ms. Ping 154 ms. Ping 378 ms. The heartbeat was faltering. Horizon's immune system was kicking in. On the screen, Chad's dashboard was still showing all green, a happy fiction in the face of unfolding disaster. But in the real world, Horizon was identifying the incoming Veridian data, processed through the shoddy QuickLink API, as a foreign contaminant. It was doing exactly what I had designed it to do. It was isolating the threat. It was shunting the corrupted data into a secure, quarantined partition and severing the connection to the Veridian servers to prevent further contamination of its core database. To Veridian, it looked like a total, catastrophic failure. To me, it looked like a success. My system was choosing to save itself. Ping, request timed out. Ping, request timed out. The public servers were no longer responding. The system had gone into lockdown. Chad's smile finally faltered. His eyes darted off-screen, presumably at a frantic Slack message. Just a minor hiccup, he stammered. A bandwidth issue. We're leveraging our resources to resolve it. This was the moment. This was the public disassembly. An unfamiliar face popped up on the call. A man with gray hair and a severe expression. Arthur Finch from the board of directors. An old-school numbers guy, known for his low tolerance for bullshit. Mr. Barrington, Finch said, his voice like cracking ice. I am on the phone with the CEO of Veridian Dynamics. He tells me his entire supply chain is offline and that his system is receiving data corruption warnings. He used the phrase unmitigated disaster. Would you care to revise your bandwidth issue assessment? Chad turned pale, the color draining from his face. We're investigating. The legacy code seems to be incompatible. The legacy code? A new voice interjected. It was Michael from finance. Arthur, if I may, I have here a series of unanswered risk assessments I filed over the last month, predicting this exact scenario. The issue is not the legacy code. It's the new integration, which was rolled out with 0, and I repeat, 0 of the contractual-mandated data integrity tests. Sarah's face reappeared. I can confirm, Mr. Finch. My team was ordered to bypass standard protocols. We have the logs. The trap was sprung. The evidence, collected by his own employees, was closing in. And then came the killing blow. Furthermore, Finch said, holding up a familiar black binder to his webcam. Our quarterly auditors discovered this in a file cabinet last week. It appears to be a full-scale risk analysis of this exact integration failure, written by the former project lead, Alina Vance. It's dated 3 years ago. He opened the binder. It predicts, and I quote, recursive error loops in archival subroutines leading to a cascade failure and data quarantine. It even seems to predict your response, Mr. Barrington, Finch added, flipping to the last page I had planted. A handwritten note here says, Synergy is not a substitute for sound engineering. Chad was speechless. He looked like a man who had been shot and was only just now realizing he was bleeding. He opened and closed his mouth, but only buzzwords came out. Scalable, frictionless, pivot. Mr. Barrington, the CEO's voice cut in, cold and final. We need to move this conversation offline. Now. Their video feeds blinked out. The town hall ended abruptly, leaving the remaining employees in a state of stunned digital silence. I closed my laptop. The silence in my apartment was no longer empty. It was calm. It was peaceful. It was the quiet sound of a perfectly executed plan reaching its conclusion. The metallic hum in my veins was back, but it was no longer the thrum of anxiety. It was the gentle, steady vibration of a well-oiled machine. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A message popped up a minute later. It was Robert, the CEO. "Eleanor, it's Robert. Listen, we've had a situation here, a massive misjudgment. We need you to tell us how to fix this. Name your price. Blank check, just please call me back." I looked at the message, then out my window at the city lights. I thought about the broken system, the panic, the chaos I knew was consuming Nexus innovations at that very moment. I had the power to fix it. I had all the leverage. They had cast me out, and now they were begging for me to save them. A slow smile spread across my face. I would call him back. Eventually. But first, I was going to finish my tea. I was going to lay out my terms, full autonomy. A new consulting firm with Nexus as my first, very lucrative client. And public credit for the restoration of the Horizon platform. The best revenge wasn't just winning. It was rebuilding, on my own terms, from the ashes of their spectacular failure. I was no longer the unseen engineer. I was the architect of my own future, and the foundations were solid. If this story of resilience resonated with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth. What part of her comeback felt the most satisfying? Let us know in the comments below.